I've observed, if we talk about Canada versus the United States, I've observed, some key differences that, in my mind, they're a matter of degree, but I think they're kind of interesting to kind of spotlight on. I can think of four specifically, and this is, again, more related to collective impact overall, and then you can see how the implications play out for backbone organizations. The first is, my sense, and again, this is sort of reading the tea leaves. I don't have an empirical data set to share with you on this, but just my sense would be a couple of things. One is that the readiness and enthusiasm to work collectively seems to be higher in Canada. And I think this is, as I speculate as to why that would be, I think Americans, we're more drawn to the success of the individual. It's part of our historical and national narrative. The success of the iconoclast individual, that's what drives sort of the American U.S. narrative. And, we recognize and hold up on a pedestal the awesome individual or organization. That's, cover of our magazines. My sense is Canadians tend to want to believe more that the whole can deliver more than the sum of the parts, and are actually, willing to act accordingly. And you said national health care is an example of that. And, in terms of the differences between the U.S. and the United States in reception to that. So I think Canada seems to me to be a culture that's more comfortable with collective action. And again, this is all a matter of degree. I think the role of government, related to this notion of the, collective being important. The debate about the role of government is everywhere, Canada, the U.S., everywhere. But I think it's, while it has picked up in Canada, I still think it's less fierce in Canada than it is in the United States. For example, I think it's much more natural as we think about, the role of backbones. It's much more natural in Canada to see a municipal or provincial government play a role as a backbone coordinating resource. It's not impossible that would happen in the U.S. We have some examples of having seen that, but it's much more in the U.S. the exception in the rule that government would play that role. So that would be a second difference. I think as we think about backbones, and particularly around funding the backbone, that there's the impact of philanthropy, U.S. versus Canada, is slightly different. And in the U.S., philanthropy typically has larger dollars and a larger voice in collaborative efforts than in Canada, at least as I've observed it. But the fact that philanthropy is bigger and larger, it's a little bit of a double-edged sword in the U.S. On the positive side, in the U.S. where there's more philanthropy, theoretically there should be more flexible funds to support collective impact and to support backbones and to support shared measurement. On the flip side, I think because the United States has a fairly crowded funder landscape, particularly in major populated areas, it's less true in rural areas, but funders love to own their specific initiatives and pick and choose who they work with. And this is what drives the culture of isolated versus collective impact. And I think this is more of a challenge to overcome in the United States than it is in Canada. So again, there's a little bit of a double-edged sword for backbone organizations in terms of the presence of philanthropy. And I think the last sort of, again, matter of degree that I might identify that I think has implications for backbones is that I think there's a greater appreciation among leaders and practitioners in Canada for the complex nuances of systems change. And I think, there are some, in the United States, it's not that it doesn't exist, this sort of appreciation for systems thinking, but I think proportionally there's a higher percentage of thought leaders in Canada who are engaged in better understanding the nature of systems change and systems thinking specifically. And, I think, and again, this is reading the tea leaves, but as a result, I think there's a broader and deeper dialogue in Canada about understanding collective impacts through the lens of systems thinking and complexity. And this, frankly, is one place where I think Canada's ahead of the United States. And again, it's not that many, people in the United States, and I'm sure many of the U.S. Folks on the phone don't get it, but I think it's a smaller voice in the dialogue in terms of how to make progress against social problem, real systems thinking. And we're looking to Canada, and we're looking to the United States too. There's some great systems thinkers in the United States, but I'm learning a lot from folks in Canada around this. So those would be sort of differences I would point to.
And just quickly, John, because FSG does do this work in a global context, I would imagine that we could go through every single country and say different things about it. But are there any patterns, even globally, that you have observed?
Well, I think I think one of the would be really hard to do this work in non-democratic countries. And so I think to the degree that there's, you know, a flourishing democracy, it makes it easier to do this collective collaborative work. In the absence of, you know, a flourishing democracy, I think it's pretty hard, because this is working across boundaries in a non-hierarchical way that requires trust and relationships. And so that, again, it's an opinion, it's an observation. Others might choose to disagree with it, but it would be an observation that I'd make.